Today's subject is policies, procedures, and programs. And this has got to be about the most boring topic you could ever have, right? Nobody wants to talk about policies, but unfortunately, it's something that we just have to do if we want to be successful in our operations. And we'll talk about why that is. But I'll start out with a question. What does your policy say? That is a question that I ask members of the trust constantly. They'll call up with a question. Hey, we have an issue with a person's drug screen, or we have an issue with this, that, or the other. And they ask whatever the question is, and wait for my response. And my response invariably is going to be, what does your policy say? Because your policy is the key guiding document that's going to determine the answers to those questions. There's a lot of other input that will go into it, but your policy is so key, and that's why we decided to have this be our loss prevention webinar for the month, is so that we really put the attention where it is due. Well, let's say it's your first day at work. Welcome to your first day of work. Glad you're here. And please draft a policy for disciplinary action. That's your first job. That's your first task on your first day at the office. Oh, and by the way, we need to fire somebody today. So we need that policy to be in place and be good. Oh, wow. Let's not get ourselves into these situations. Let's not get ourselves to a point where we need to do something and we don't have a policy, or we haven't updated that policy, or it's inadequate, or it doesn't represent how we do things around here. Let's do it right. Now, that's going to take some work on our part, and that's really the intention of this webinar, is to get us kind of kicked off and started on that. This is not the do-all, end-all. It's really just to give us some guidance and a little bit of a kick to dive in and look at our policies. So we talk about policies, procedures, and programs. Are they the same? Are they different? What do those words mean? So let's dive into each one. What is a policy? A policy is a guiding principle that directs how we go about doing our mission, accomplishing our mission as an organization. And we'll talk about what that mission is, but what is it? What is it that you do? What is it that you believe as an organization? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? A policy is our rule book. They are our rules. And here's an interesting angle on this. Policies don't have to be written. Have you ever heard of an unwritten policy? And those policies don't have to be official to be in place. Here's the kind of scary thing. If we don't write our policies, they're still going to be written. We just don't have anything to say about what's in that policy, because those policies become in force just because of the way we do things. So we have to intentionally go about creating our policies. Otherwise, we just kind of naturally make policies, and they may or may not be right. They may or may not keep us out of trouble. They may or may not prevent somebody from dying on the job. And that's really what may be at stake. So just ask yourself, what is your mission? What is the thing that we're doing? What is our ultimate purpose? And our policies and procedures should really support that. Employees should understand what that mission is, and also what how our policies go about trying to accomplish that. Sometimes we'll come up with the big lofty statements that we can put out there, like a safety charter. Here at the Trust, we have a safety charter that says Utah Local Governments Trust is committed to the safety and health of its employees and members. We will commit whatever time and resources necessary to ensure that our operations are done safely. I think that's a good thing. It's a great way to start out, to have an overall mission or something that we believe in. This is where we go. Okay, why do we have policies? It's to help define a path to reach our entity's goals. Sometimes it's to meet compliance obligations, because OSHA says we have to have an emergency action plan. Well, we're going to create an emergency action plan so we meet those compliance obligations. Oh, and at the same time, we want to be able to safely get our people out of the building if we have to evacuate or take the appropriate actions in whatever the emergency is. It also helps us to define the rules for behavior for our team. And really one of those most critical things, it helps us to prevent or minimize losses. And when I say losses, that means accidents, injuries, bad things that mistakes that we make. That's all something that we can control with our policies. So policy development can help also build our entity's culture. We define who we are with our policies in these statements. And if we do a good job of sharing that information, then everybody else will get that as well. So the next question, when do we need a policy? When do I have to put a policy in place? And and sometimes it's a legal requirement. OSHA says, or the federal government, or the state government, or whatever the regulatory agency or governmental official is, says you have to, thou shalt do this. And if that's the case, then we have to put a policy in place. We also put policies in place when it's important, when we can't mess up, when the consequences from failure are bad. Lives are on the line, right? Consequences for failure are unacceptable. And so we build policies and procedures around those. And sometimes policies are to get people to do something or to get them to not do something. Those are what our employee policies are all about. All right. What is a procedure? A procedure is a little bit different. A procedure is a specified manner or series of steps to carry out our policy. Some places will call this a process. I worked in manufacturing for a long time before I came to the trust, and we had defined processes. So I worked in very chemical intensive industries, and if you made a mistake, you could have a really bad problem happen. You could mix the wrong chemicals together. And so we had very specific defined processes, step by step, exactly what you had to do to accomplish a task. And every one of those employees needed to be trained and certified to perform that policy. Or they weren't allowed, or to perform that procedure, or they weren't allowed to do that. And they had to be supervised during their training time before they were certified. So that's what a procedure can do for us, is give us that easy step by step role to do that. So think about what you do as an organization. I'll give an example here of a lot of you out there, whether you're in a district or a city, some counties may provide water, drinking water. So our policy, our overall goal, deliver safe, quality drinking water to our residents. Okay, that's a good thing. Our procedure are the steps to collect that water, sanitize it, store it, pressurize it, and deliver that drinking water through there. So what are the steps that it would take? I think back to when I was in college. I worked as a metal fabricator. Mike's sick of hearing me talk about stories of being a metal fabricator, but I ran punch presses. Now this one in here is not this is a hydraulic press, and so it's really slow. The one I worked on, it was like 150-ton punch press, and it would go bang, and it would, and I had multiple stations on that. And these stations, every time you would cycle it, you'd have to take the finished product off the end station, put it to the side, take the next one, turn it. And my supervisor's telling me how to do this. My first night on the job, he says, okay, you pull the first one off, the finished product off, put it over here, take the next one, turn it, rotate it 90 degrees, slide it back on that mandrel, take the next one, flip it 90 degrees, turn it 90 degrees, rotate it 90 degrees, put it on that mandrel, take the next one, rotate it 90 degrees, then take a new part, put it on the first station, push your button, cycle it, and then start that all over again. Oh, by the way, don't forget to check your parts every 10 parts and measure. Here's your blueprint. If you mess up, we're taking it out of your check. And that was about how much training I had on it. There was no process that said this is exactly how you have to do that. Was there a high likelihood that I would mess up? Well, yeah. And as a matter of fact, I did. Now, it wasn't my fault. Every time you would punch a hole in this metal, there would be a little slug that would come out, the little piece of metal that got punched out, and it would drop out onto a metal table. Now, over time, these slugs were about the size of a quarter, and they started stacking up. And after so much time, there wasn't enough room for another slug to be punched out. And when this 150 tons of pressure came down, it pressurized. Just imagine taking a whole stack of quarters and putting a whole bunch of pressure on it. Think about the hydraulic press channel on YouTube. And these quarters slugs shot out and they shot me all over and they doubled me over. And I thought I was in really bad shape. I thought I had been perforated. And at the end of the day, I was okay. It didn't hurt me bad. But I learned a lesson there. But the company had no process. The supervisor hadn't trained me. There should have been a simple process that I could have read that said, do this, 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 this. Oh, and every so many parts, clean out those slugs so they don't shoot out at you. Well, that this was a critical process because I was injured, although not very seriously. I was injured because of a failure to have a procedure to prevent something from happening. All right, so procedures ensure that all of the steps are followed. If we forget a step, what might happen? Could be a really bad thing. Procedures provide critical controls to prevent accidents and bad product. Um, and so they give us those steps that will prevent us from making a mistake, prevent us from messing up in our process. Okay, and they give us clear instructions on how to do our jobs. When do we want to have one of these? Well, it's really key that we do these in critical processes where the penalty for failure is going to be somebody gets injured. So for sure, that's where we need to be. Do I need a process that tells me how to staple papers together? Well, probably not. It's not a critical process. So I have to identify what I'm doing and determine, is this something that deserves having a procedure? All right. What is a program? This is kind of similar to a policy, but it's a little broader than that. It's not just the rules. It is an organized effort to address a certain concern or a problem, and what you will do to accomplish the mission. So examples with this from the safety world would be things like a hearing conservation program. Well, we have high levels of noise in our workplace. And so if we're over a certain action level, then we have to build a hearing conservation program that says, here are the steps that we're going to do to preserve our staff's hearing so they don't lose that due to noise exposure. Okay, let's keep going here because like Mike's presentation today, I got a lot of stuff in a short amount of time. This is something we didn't put in the title because policies, procedures, and programs and forms is a pretty bad title. So forms are also part of this whole thing. This is the documentation that we use to record our activities under a procedure. And they could be things like permits. Mike talked about confined space entry. We have a confined space entry permit, hot work permit. We have work orders that say this is what I'm supposed to go out and do. I'm going to follow the procedure to do that, but these are the ways that I record what I'm doing. And then there are inspections, checklists, reports, things like that. Just remember, if it isn't written down, it never happened. And so documentation is key with all of these things. This is how we control the variables that can happen. We have a process and we write stuff down. Okay, ask ourselves, do we need a policy for that? Once again, I would answer that question what what is the consequence of failure to have a policy? If somebody makes a mistake, what is the potential result? If that result is a fatality or a serious injury, absolutely we need to have a policy and procedures around that. So that's a key question that each of us have to make for all of the aspects of our operations. Okay. Now here's a question for you. Do your policies and how we really do it around here, do those things match? If our policies don't match how we really do things, that's a problem. And that could get people hurt. That could cause us legal issues, compliance issues with regulatory agencies. And so if this is your problem, you've got a hard question to ask. Well, who's doing it wrong? Is our policy wrong? Or is the procedure, the way people are actually doing the job, is that wrong? Or is it somewhere in between? Sometimes we have a disconnect between what's done and what is written down in the policy. And that's a bad problem to have, and we need to correct those things. I keep going back to accidents and injuries. Um, in in the event that we had a serious injury or heaven forbid a fatality, and we're walking through that and doing our incident review, we're going to look at policies and procedures. Did we have an adequate policy? Did the procedure match what we were supposed to do? And if those don't match, then we got to answer some pretty soul-searching questions there. All right. All right. So, how do we go about writing a policy? This is this is probably not the thing that you want to do, but it's nice to have this topic in at the start of winter because it's going to be cold and we want to stay inside. And now it's time to curl up with our policies and ensure that we've got these done right. So, how do we go about writing a policy? Let's take a step by step look at this. Some really basic things. What do you want your policies to look like? Now, I kind of was inculcated into this into policies in a very rigid format. We would use the 1.1.2.6.12b blah blah blah, and we would use very legalese sounding policies. Now, I still have a tendency to go that direction because it's very logical in my mind. I can find things fairly easily. But whatever you decide to do, pick a format and stick with it. Make sure your policies are all look the same and are consistent across your organization. So we don't have different formats, so we can find things, and so we're able to control those documents from one department to another and across the entire organization. Use plain speech in the way you write these. Like I said, I have that tendency to try to sound a little bit more like the Code of Federal Regulations than I should, and I've gotten better over the years. But that was how I was brought up in the system, and I wrote a lot of policies and procedures in that way, and so it's hard to kind of get out of that. But let's try to make our policies readable and understandable by everybody. Could the average person, the average employee in your organization pick up this policy and know what you're talking about and really understand and dive in and do what we're asking them to do? That should be our goal, is to be understood by everybody. Think about the different elements in our policy. Oh, and by the way, there's no standardized format that you have to use. It's something that's your decision. But once you've made that decision, it's hard to change that throughout the organization. So I would make a conscious decision on what this is and really discuss with your management team, how do we want this to look? How do we want it to be organized? Then our elements to our policies. It should include things like purpose and scope, references if we're going to standards or other documents or maybe laws. References are important there. Definitions, so people understand what those words mean when they're in there. If we say competent person, well, that has a very specific definition under OSHA. Who is responsible for what? Who does what part of of each part of this procedure? And then our operational controls. Now that's a big fancy word for our procedures. What is it that what controls are we going to have in place to ensure that this goes right? And then a revision history. I told you this is exciting stuff. We need to track the changes that have happened over time. And having a history, a revision history, is a key way to do that. So at the end, we document in there in 2025, we did an annual update and we added some new language because of a new law, something like that. 2026, no new updates, but some or a minor annual update, no changes. Let's track what we've done over time, so we're able to show where we've been. All right. Um, Here's some other words, some language in here that may help us out. What are your aspects and impacts? What does your organization do? What are the potential impacts that you have on people, the environment, the equipment, processes, all of those things? What do you do as an organization, and how does that impact others? Think about that and write it down. Well, we provide water. We provide drinking water. Well, the potential impacts with that is we have pressurized water in those lines, and sometimes we have line breaks, and that can cause an impact on our community. Or if we're not able to provide that water, that can provide a major impact on our community. All right. Then we need to think about our legal and other requirements that we have. There may be federal, state, local, or other laws that govern us and require us to have a policy around that. There are other things that are out there. Consensus standards like ASTM, ANSI, fire code, electric code, all of those things may be a requirement for us. And so we've got to identify those as well. What is it that we have to do to maintain compliance? And we write those down. And then we're going to take all of that stuff and put it together in a policy. How do I go about researching standards? Well, you can ask questions. You can certainly take some classes from us and look at webinars that we put on YouTube and Trey Lyon, that where we go in and talk about the specifics of complying with a standard. But I always recommend that you go right to the horse's mouth. Go to the regulatory agency. I'm going to use OSHA because everybody is under OSHA in one way or another, and it's also a good way to show how we can go about identifying that. Go to OSHA.gov, and when you get there, one of the best ways to find your way around is to go to there. You click A to Z index, and I can go in and I can search. Their search options not the best, but A to Z index, I can go in and say I want to learn about confined spaces, and I just scroll down to the C's. Oh, confined space entry, and then I can dive in. If I click on confined space entry, look, it gives me standards and enforcement, hazard solutions, construction options, additional information. There's a ton of material there. Now, I'll click on standards, and it's going to take me to the actual code. And it says scope and application, definitions, the things that we talked about. What is a confined space? If you watched Mike's presentation today, the definitions that he used in there are directly out of the OSHA permit required confined space entry standard. That's not by accident. We want to ensure that we're staying as close to the standard as we can. So go in and read the standard. Sometime early in my career, I was looking at building policies for something or other, and I talked to people, and they told me this and that, and my brain started spinning. And then I pulled out the standard and I just read it, and I'm like, oh, I can do that. That's easy. Take the time to read and understand what your requirements are, and then we can build our policy around that. What are our objectives and targets? What are we trying to do? How do we get to our mission? And then our targets are those intermediate goals. Here's what we're going to do to get there. Who's responsible? That is a key element as well. Define who has the responsibility, who does each task, and what resources are available to accomplish those tasks. That is an essential thing, because if we don't define that, everybody's going to stand around looking at each other. It's not my job. And so let's be very clear in who does what. Those operational controls, the procedures that we have need to be documented. We need to train our people on it and verify that our critical tasks have been covered. Now, you may have a certification process on this, but it's not necessarily required. But once again, I go back to, if it's a critical task, I would look at certifying those employees, operators, so we know that they know how to do it right. If you're getting into a confined space, if you are doing trench operations, those are critical tasks. The penalty for failure there could be death. All right. Just a reminder that policies are living documents. If our policies and procedures are not continuously improved, they may not be worth a whole lot. If nobody reads them, they really aren't very worth anything, and they might actually be a detriment to us. They may get us into trouble because it doesn't represent exactly how we're doing the task. I want to ask you a question. When was the last time you updated your policies and procedures? And I know this is not fun. It's not the thing that anybody wants to do on a nice summer day or spring day, is to go and update policies. But if we don't build this into our average or our regular operations, it's not going to happen. And ask yourself the question: is everything current? Have there been new laws or changes in laws that have come out that may affect whether our policies are even legal? And when was the last time you had your attorney review your policies and procedures? This is a key part of that, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. But having your attorney review those policies and procedures, mostly policies, but to ensure that we've met the legal obligations that we have, and that we haven't built a time bomb into our policies because we just didn't understand what those legal requirements are. Okay, a few more elements in there. Who does what, or on training? If we have a policy, that probably mean if it impacts employees, it means that they need to be trained on it. Now, that could be through onboarding as a new employee. It could be an annual thing, or if we update a policy, that we have an all-staff meeting or a department meeting, and have people sign in and say, "Yep, I understand this new policy." Let's see, I'll skip document control for just a second. Corrective and preventive actions. If we have a problem, if we don't do things wrong or don't do things right, or we find a problem in our procedure, how do we go about correcting those things and getting the word out to everybody? Hey, we updated, we found a problem, and we've updated that. Management needs to take a look at our policies on a periodic basis, and once again, we'll come back to that, and look at it from a compliance standpoint as well. Okay, document control. I want to take that one a little bit on its own. Do you have a policy out there that everybody thinks is still a policy, but you changed it a while ago? Or is there a policy out there lurking around that's in a binder or somewhere that suddenly is going to come out to haunt you? So one of the key ways you can keep track of that and not have those issues is to control your documents. We have a list or an index of what our policies are, and they have to become an official policy. They have to go through an official process to get there. How long do we keep that? You probably have a document retention policy that you've developed because of some state laws regarding document retention. But once again, these are things that we should keep in mind. How long do we need to keep this around? Can I ever throw this away? Date and revision number on each document. So we need to have a number of the document and and also when was that last revised. So it's really easy to look at that. And I would put that at the header of the document so you can see where that is. And then also define the frequency of revisions. How often are we going to go about revising that? We'll talk about that in just a minute. So how do I go about writing these things? Can I just cheat? Can I go out and just grab my neighbor agency that does similar stuff to what we do and just copy their policies? And the answer is yes, but what's the but of that? You got to go through and you got to make it tailored to your organization. Now, I have to admit, one time I kind of got bid on this one. I'd taken a new job, and the organization had gone out and purchased a package of policies, standard operating procedures from a consultant, and so and they were voluminous, right? We had multiple binders showing the different operating procedures, and we paid a lot of money for it. Well, I was a little late to the game. I took this job, and all of these policies had been implemented, I thought, and then a regulatory agency, OSHA, showed up, and they said, let's go through your standard operating procedures. And we're going through, and they asked me something about our policies and procedures. I said, oh yeah, these are great. We've got it down. and and then the OSHA inspector asked me about the ice cream freezer. And I said, excuse me? He says, well, in your policy, this policy, blah, blah, or operating procedure, blah, 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 it talks about the ice cream freezer. Could you show me the ice cream freezer? And we didn't have an ice cream freezer. This was a boilerplate policy that the company had purchased from a consultant and paid them a whole bunch of money for that. And they hadn't done the job to proofread it well enough to find something that just didn't even fit with our operations. And admittedly, I hadn't identified that either. So how valuable were those procedures? Well, less valuable than and potentially hazardous, because if somebody's searching for that ice cream freezer when something else is going on, that could be a problem. So whatever it is we do, I advocate, especially in government service, to beg, borrow, and steal from our friends and other similar organizations out there, from the trust and whatever else we have out there. But we've got to take the time to ensure that our policies match what we're doing. Here's some thoughts on some helps on writing policy. Boilerplates. The trust designated safety officer resources, we have a page on there. We're sticking this up on YouTube, so I'm not going to put up the QR code, but if you would like that, maybe we'll put a link to that as we send out emails after. But if you really would like a link, send me an email, jason@utahtrust.gov, and we'll get that to you. OSHA has some great resources for employers. They have boilerplate policies, procedures. You can put in your information, and it will help build basic policies there. There are a lot of white papers and additional information that will help an employer put this stuff together. Once again, beg, borrow, and steal. Use your resources that you have available. Professionals, and I'm going to talk about Matt Church here in a minute. We've negotiated with Matt Church to give you a great deal on rewriting policies, especially for around your personnel policies. Matt Church is a great attorney, and he does our trust legal brief. We're going to have one tomorrow, by the way, if you haven't signed up for that. And the pricing on that is really good. This is just a much easier way to kick this off, is to use some professionals like that. Some of you out there are asking, hey, can I just use AI to write my policies for me? Um, and I'm sure a lot of you out there trust AI far more than I do. I've seen a lot of inaccurate information come out of AI, Chat GPT, and other large language software that really makes me nervous. I'm not saying don't use AI, but realize it is not the do all end all. A lot of we're in the initial stages of artificial intelligence, and there's a lot of garbage that comes out of it now. So if you choose to use that, go, buyer beware, because the information may not be accurate. And so you need to do a lot of work on the back end. It can save a ton of time putting together the basics of a policy, but it doesn't suffice to cover the review, the legal review, the management review, and really, does it match our operations? So just be really careful about that. Once again, policy review. Our recommendation is that you do an annual review on all of your policies. So that's either by HR if it's a personnel type policy, your safety committee if it's a safety policy, or if you've got safety professionals there, they could do that. Management as well, and then a legal review every 3 years. And I know that's a fairly tall order if you don't have in-house counsel, but it's the thing that's going to keep you out of trouble, is by doing that. Now, the first time it's going to be painful, because if you haven't done it for a long time, it's gonna be a painful process. But after that, it's going to be much easier. Every 3 year cycle will be better, and your policies will be good. All right. Let me just hit, because we're about out of time. Here's a list of must-have OSHA policies. These are ones that if you have exposure to any one of these, you've got to have a written policy around it. And these are things that we have boilerplates on in our designated safety officer resources page. Other must-have policies, your personnel policies, discipline, grievance, FMLA, and this is not an exhaustive list. I put multiple exclamation points after, et cetera, because there are a lot of these things. These are just ones that popped into my head as being ones that you really should have a written policy around. I started the presentation with, what does your policy say? And I'm going to keep asking that question, because we need to learn our policies. We need to be actively engaged with our policies on a regular basis, so they are a living document. They are guiding our decisions and actions each and every day. Let's make these policies valuable. Let's make them the things that make our jobs easier instead of more difficult. One more question on that. Are your critical processes documented? Are the things that could get people dead, do we have a process, a procedure around them that will ensure that we do things correctly and keep people safe? Well, just to wrap up, some action on this. Policy, procedures, and programs are powerful tools if we use them correctly, if they're accurate, if they identify how we go about doing our job there. If those things don't match, we've got a problem. If I don't have anything written down for those critical control points, we've got a big problem, and we're at risk of having serious incidents or potentially fatalities. Are we reviewing our policies regularly? That's a key. That's a key element as well. All right, that was a lot of stuff. I said it was going to be 40 minutes, and I think I was about right there. If you have questions or comments, please go ahead and type those in the chat box. Mike, anything in the chat box already, and anything I missed?
We do have a comment from Jeff Rowley, our claims manager here at the trust. Types there in the chat. Must have policies include sidewalk and property inspection and maintenance
Yeah.
programs. Best defense tools for liability claims are these kind of policies.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, that's great.
And FYI, that will be the topic of our loss prevention webinar in January. So we're going to hit that one really hard. But thank you, Jeff, for reminding me to have that on there. I'll put that on the slide. Absolutely, this is a key area. We just have to have that in place. So, okay, thanks, Jeff. Anything
Yep.
else, Mike?
Nope, that's it. That's all we got.
All right. Well, folks, thank you so much for your time and attention on this. Mike and myself and Jeff as well. He didn't speak up for this, but I'll put him out there as well. We are all available, and really everybody at the trust to help you and give you answer questions and give you some guidance where it comes to policies, procedures, and really how to best manage your risks. That's our job, is to help you be successful and avoid the pain and heartache that can come from not having these things in place. And that's our job, and we're committed to help you out there. So, thanks, folks. Go out and have a safe day.